I've made one video before talking about the general inutility of therapy and its overprescription. And I do think therapy and the idea of getting therapy is overprescribed. But I didn't touch upon a key issue involving therapy. And one of the reasons why, particularly in today's day and age, and specifically as it applies to men, young men, up and coming in the world, why it just is amiss and why it does not land properly where it's supposed to, and why in some cases it's utterly useless. So the analogy I would begin with is this notion of somebody with very serious cancer, maybe even terminal. And instead of doing chemo and all these other things to aggressively treat it, you just say, look, you have liver cancer, Mr. Smith, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some aspirin, some Band-Aids too, free on the house, and I'm going to send you home. If you're not feeling well, you can always get a new prescription. Maybe if it gets really bad, I can even give you some morphine. And that's what we're going to do for you, despite your cancer, which is metastasizing, which is getting worse, which in all likelihood will claim your life given sufficient time. Now, that sounds on the face of it absurd, patently so, but that's basically what therapy is in many, many cases, not all cases, because there are certain contexts where therapy is useful. The Lord of Gingers, the Slayer of Tax Dragons, and the Scion of Dagda, Pete, that guy who everyone invites to gatherings, the Punani Slayer, has been quite open about his own travails and tribulations, and he mentions that therapy has worked for him. He sees a therapist, it helps him. But this is a very important point here. I want you to bear in mind, in the case of the great ginger-haired Punani Slayer, that Pete is a pretty put-together guy. Is he completely put together? No. But in the most important respects, he is. He is very educated in his field, that is accounting. He's very good at it. He's ascending in the hierarchy of his workplace. He doesn't have any crippling mental dysfunction. And the list goes on and on. He's a highly functional individual. And so he has some cuts and some bruises. His father, for example, passing away when he was 19, which led to 9 years of alcoholism on his part. He has some cuts and bruises. He's largely recovered from that, but he does have some cuts and bruises. And so he goes to the doctor and say, look, doc, I have these issues. Can you give me something? And he says, yeah, here's the aspirin for the bruises and here are the Band-Aids for the cuts. And it makes sense, i.e. he's going to a therapist. He finds it helpful. But again, if Pete were a terminal cancer patient, it wouldn't be very helpful. What am I talking about specifically? I'm talking about guys who've never launched at all. And there are a plethora of them. There are many of them. One of my closest friends in existence is a guy who never launched, to be perfectly blunt. He never finished high school. He was a social pariah. He does not have a tremendous amount of friends. He has no qualifications. And his prospects for the future are both dim and grim. I think he would acknowledge that. And indeed, in some respects, he's even more black-pilled than I am. And that might make sense given his background. But you take someone like that, or any number of other individuals I've talked to over the years who failed to launch. They never finished school, or if they did, they had zero social contact, no friends, certainly no GF, couldn't hold down a job, basically screwed. And there are many such guys, and we hear about it all the time, right? The crisis of men, the crisis of men and boys. Now, I propose to you that this overprescription of therapy, which is largely a female enterprise, even mainstream people like Chad Williams acknowledge this, that therapy as such is largely a female enterprise made by women for women. But let's set that aside for the sake of argument. The point here is that there are many, perhaps millions of men, say in the United States, who never launched. They are not even close to launching. And what they need is not therapy. They need the chemo. They need something akin to a team of people intervening in their lives, supporting them in all the relevant ways, as in providing them education, training, going to the gym with them, boosting them up, if need be, for several years, before they can counter all the negativity and the bad luck they've received in life, in order to ultimately reverse the negative Matthew effect loop and turn it into, at the very least, a neutral Matthew effect loop, if not outright a positive one, although that might be stretching it. The kinds of interventions that are necessary for a lot of these guys who are struggling out there, a lot of these young men, go well beyond what a therapist could possibly do, to be perfectly frank. They need active support, active help, people that would be willing to intervene in their lives and help them in major ways on a consistent and long-term basis. Because the way it works with a negative Matthew effect loop is it's cumulative. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to extricate yourself from it. Because if you have primarily negative experiences that yield more negative experiences that redound to your misfortune, one positive experience, one neutral experience, 2, 3, 4, that's not going to be enough. If you're 25 years old or 20 years old and you've only had the negative Matthew effect loop going on in your life, it's going to take a hell of a lot of stuff that is at the very least neutral and probably more likely positive to reverse that. And therapy just ain't it. I'm sorry. Therapy is a bandaid. And if you have some cuts and bruises, like Pete, I'm sure he wouldn't be offended by that, you'll be fine. Pete's a very competent human being. He's very well put together. He's got some issues, but they're not huge issues. Compare that to somebody who completely failed to launch, never finished school, has basically no friends, no prospects. Do you really think therapy is going to help that person out? And of course, what's then added to this as a problem is that those type of guys who need the help the most are the people in society that are also looked down at the most, meaning nobody gives a crap about them. And for many people, these young men are so lowly in the eyes of the world that they deserve their fate. And so there's even less of an incentive to help them. Honestly, even if you're not, imagine yourself a 20-something. You failed to launch. You never finished high school. You have no useful skills. You're not educated, at least in the official way. You don't have a lot of social contacts. Your mother was an alcoholic, for example, and you come from a fairly dysfunctional home. And somebody says, oh, you just need to do therapy. Therapy to do what? You probably don't even know anyone in such a case that you could apply the techniques to that you learned from your so-called therapist. Because we're talking about really acute cases of failure here. Really acute cases of things that simply cannot be fixed by talking to somebody, most likely a woman. It goes a lot deeper than that. And despite the accusations I constantly receive about being a Debbie Downer or a negative Nancy, why am I pointing this out? Because if you actually wanted to help these guys, the kinds of interventions I'm talking about would be necessary. It's a lot easier just to brush aside the ills of young men and the youth by saying just see a therapist. I mean, therapy these days is like a gym membership. It's just something you do. Plenty of people squander their gym memberships. I know I have in the last 3 years or so. And so people really need to come to terms with this and become aware of this fact that therapy might have its benefits in minor cases. But if you are a total failure to launch, or you simply have no prospects in life, you don't even know anyone to talk to, what is therapy supposed to do? You go see the therapist and then you go back home all alone and stare into the void and practice something that you learned there? It's just insufficient. And even though it seems distantly related, it's always connected to the rapid erosion of activities and support systems that used to exist for males. The Boy Scouts doesn't exist anymore. And I'm not claiming that every young guy would join the Boy Scouts, but the point is there were outlets, there were systems that existed to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks. Now everything is tailored towards women, and we're all too happy as a society to allow men to fall through the cracks, all the while blaming them for falling through the cracks, and blaming them for being incompetent, and blaming them for not being able to tough it out on their own, while simultaneously giving every form of aid conceivable to girls and women, and then pretending that the women did it all by themselves. It's beyond absurd, the situation we're in. Just see a therapist, bruh. That will solve your problems. That will solve your recessed jawline, your hair loss, your lack of height, your lack of brains, the lack of education over the last 12 years, the lack of friends you have. All of that, that's going to fix your problems. Just see a therapist. Because the thing about therapy is that if you talk about something enough, your words will become magical and you can transform reality itself, as if through wizardry. At least that's what people would have you believe. As always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons. You guys are the best. You keep the channel afloat and alive and keep it going. You have my everlasting gratitude. Same to my donors on PayPal. And in general, if you can leave a like, share, comment, subscribe. I heard that somehow helps with the algorithm, although it's never been very apparent to me. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out next time. Until then, May the gods truly watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.